everyone. Welcome to the Good Doctor's Diagnose for Wednesday, December 4th. I am Dr. Kristen, and I want to talk to you really briefly about a really fun cross-cultural tradition that you may or may not be aware of. So in the United Kingdom, and potentially in other European cities, and I'm not sure, but I do know about the UK. There is and Ireland, a really fun interactive holiday tradition called a pantomime, or a panto for short, in which kind of children's stories, so like I've seen Aladdin, I've seen Jack and the Beanstalk, I've seen Cinderella, are told in an interactive way. Like there's always a character in a panto whose job it is to talk to the audience. The audience's job is to talk back. So for instance, the first panto I saw was in Glasgow. It was about Cinderella. And there was a like street child type character whose job it was to tell us when someone evil was right behind Cinderella. And so like that character's on stage all the time, even if they're just standing like on a side of the stage, and they'll look at all of us and we'll all scream, "Look behind you!" And Cinderella will be like, "What? Where's that voice coming from?" So there's a couple things that I love about panto traditions. There are very problematic elements of pantos. I've seen some real racist pantos that I really wish people would rewrite. And they certainly go for the cheap jokes. And cheap jokes tend to be the ones based entirely on stereotypes. So I'm not saying that pantos are a perfect tradition. I'm saying they're fun, frequently. And also that we can kind of learn from them. So first of all, stories are kind of best learned when we're involved with them. So storytelling is an incredible art. There are people who are excellent storytellers, people who are professional storytellers, people who are just really good at it. And if you'll notice, what's good about them is that they get the audience involved very quickly in either identifying with a character specifically, or with understanding that the journey that the character is on is a journey that they themselves have been on. So while it may not be actually interactive to where you're yelling something, "Look behind you," it is emotionally interactive. The best stories are the ones that we find ourselves in, which is one of the reasons that representation is so incredibly important in storytelling. When we talk about pop culture here at Abbey Research, and when, especially this time of year, when it's really easy to make fun of Hallmark movies for not being an inclusive entity, we are especially aware of it though. It's hard to truly invest in stories you can't see yourself in. So I knew when I was growing up, all of the movies had the really skinny, beautiful girl falling in love, and girls that looked like me were the sidekick. And I learned really quickly that my job from those movies, that my job in society was to be the funny sidekick. I was, if I made a joke about my weight first, just like all the girls in the movies did, then no one else could hurt me. The first time I saw somebody who looked like me have a happily ever after of their own was Sookie St. James on the Gilmore Girls, played by Melissa McCarthy. And it's why, even when I don't love Melissa McCarthy's movies, there's a real special place in my heart for her, because she's the first time I saw myself on screen as somebody who was worthy of her own story and not just as a sidekick. And they still made terrible fat jokes on that show. It's one of the reasons I can't rewatch it now. And I love Friends, but Fat Monica is really painful. And that's not the only intersection I need to see myself in. It is certainly the most visible and the one that comes to mind the most and the most emotional for me. But other intersections that I would love to see more represented are people of faith who are not caricatures, people who are in intercultural marriages, people who have lived outside of the United States, Americans whose idea of patriotism doesn't come wrapped in a flag, some things like that. Friends of mine, people whose bodies are differently abled. I have chronic pain, but I have friends who use walkers every day. I'd love to see more characters like that. Of course, there's always a need for people on the autism spectrum, etc., etc., etc. So what we can learn from pantos is that stories need to be interactive. And what we can take from that is that we need to come up with new ways to make people see themselves in the story and to interact with the story. And if no story is going to be fully intersectional. There's no way. We're always going to miss intersections. So how do you create a space to understand that this story is not the only story? How do you still invite people in who can't see themselves in that story, but might just really enjoy it? Because that's possible too. My mom and I joke, we read romance novels, Regency romance novels. And we always joke, there's no way we would have ever fallen in love with a duke in England in 1813. But it's fun to read about Poppy St. James doing it. So there are certainly times we don't need to see ourselves, but the stories that we learn the most from are the ones we see ourselves in. And that's the lesson I think we can take from the UK tradition of pantos. We will see you again on Monday for another Good Doctors Diagnose. In the meantime, have a great week, guys. Bye.